back to business. Good morning, everybody. I'm Neema Lugangira. I'm a member of parliament in Tanzania, but I'm also the chairperson of the African Parliamentary Network on Internet Governance. It's a network that currently has about 30 plus members of parliament from 24 plus countries in Africa, covering all 5 regions of Africa. I'm pretty excited to be here with you guys. CIPESA is doing great work, and the topic of technology for equality is something that resonates with me very well. And once again, being that it's Women's Month, as women, we have to show that we have the ability to show up and push forward. So it is about 3 a.m. where I am here, but I'm excited to be here, and I look forward to having conversations that will also inform me as a policymaker, as a legislator, and what needs to be done from a policy perspective to push forward technology for equality. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that intro. We'll get into a bit more of what CIPESA does and why we're convened here. Once we're done with this round of introductions, then it will all make sense on why we're taking this approach. Next, we will hand over to Nashilongo. Please take the stage. Your microphone.
Oh, sorry, I was speaking to myself there, Juliet. And good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here today. My name is Nashilongo Gervasius. As Juliet has introduced me, I am in Windhoek, Namibia at this point. I am glad to be engaging on this topic that we have been, working on for some times now. What do? My full-time work, I'm a lecturer of media and communications, particularly on digital media at the Namibia University of Science and Technology. And I'm also the founder of the Internet Society Namibia chapter and the board member there. I consult under Namshwe Digital, which is a consulting agency that I run and work together on digital rights and research and other matters. I'm so glad to be here, and happy Women's Month and happy Women's Week, everyone. Looking forward to the engagement.
Wonderful, thanks for that. And next up we have Martha. Please take the stage.
Thank you, Juliet. Good morning, everyone. My name is Martha Chlongoshi. I'm currently in Lusaka, Zambia. I'm a journalist by background, and for the last 6 to 7 years, I've been a consulting media professional working on the intersection of gender, media, tech, and governance through a consulting agency called Revolt Media that is now transitioning into a non-profit hoping to serve underserved communities about 22 miles out of Lusaka, where people still struggle with literacy, with digital skills, with tools. So hopefully I can, work with some of you that are in this space once that project takes off. As always, I'm happy to be here. Always love the work that CIPESA does, and looking forward to this conversation, seeing that we are celebrating Women's Month and Women's Week in particular, especially in Zambia, where we have a situation where a couple of women who marched to protest against sexual and gender-based violence were actually arrested by the police. So this conversation is quite timely for me and for everyone who's present, just to shine a light on some of the challenges that we have in terms of policies, in terms of the ICT sector, in Zambia and across the rest of the continent. So looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Wonderful, and welcome once again. Next, we have right here alongside us in Uganda, Honorable Joyce Bagala. Kindly introduce yourself.
Well, good morning. I do not know what the time is in the rest of the world. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm very glad to be here. I'm really sorry I'm a bit late. because I had another program similar to this. My name is Joyce Bagala Ntuatwa. I am a member of parliament. I am also the Shadow Minister for Information and Anti-Corruption. Glad to be here.
And wonderful to have you here. So with that round of introduction, I think we've seen the diversity of voices that we have, people representing different stakeholders in the internet governance arena. We've got individuals in civil society, academia, government, and within our audience, I've just had a run through it, an even greater representation of the greater community that we work with as CIPESA. And indeed, that helps us achieve our mission of promoting inclusive and effective use of ICT in Africa for improved governance and livelihood. So welcome once again, and thank you for being a part of this community that's helping us achieve this mission. I just wanted us to take a few minutes to reflect on where we are in the different parts of the world. Right now, Honorable Nima Lugangira is in the US, where there's a big meeting on the future, or rather the current state of digital use of the internet by women. Then we headed over to Namibia, where we also had the Windhoek Declaration, which is a stance on access to information, freedom of expression, and its application in the greater digital arena and beyond. So fantastic to have voices from there. In Zambia, we have Martha, who was also our MC at our annual Forum on Internet Freedom in Africa event. This is a gathering that we host as CIPESA every year. We've hosted it every year since 2014. And this year will mark the 10th year of that forum. So we look forward to having you all there as well. And in Uganda, we have Honorable Bagala. Uganda is a unique country in that it plays home to CIPESA and is home to many progressive developments and also some rather interesting concerns that keep emerging when it comes to internet access, affordability, freedom of expression, and access to information. So that should set the foundation of the discussion that we're going to be having here today. As an organization, CIPESA does a wide host of work of course, related to the rights of women in online spaces, but also related to the rights of other communities of the digital society, including the media and civil rights defenders rather, of persons with disabilities. How do we actually make the internet arena one that is accessible, affordable, and welcoming to more members of society? How do you make the digital society one that is a realization rather than a dream for more members for more people from the continent? And for today, being part of the discussions or interventions that we're having as part of International Women's Day, or rather International Women's Month, as we like to refer to it here, we'd like to make that, so the discussion around gender inclusivity, innovation, technology, we'd like to make the focus of today's conversation. And the reason we are here today as CIPESA is because this is a continuation of work that we've been doing over the years with regards to gender and inclusion. We have done quite a bit of work looking at the issue of affordability. How affordable is the online space for women and marginalized communities in the continent? What needs to happen at the policy level? One of the interventions that we did there was around hosting discussions on the social media tax in Uganda a few years ago. But that has evolved into other aspects of the digital economy. How do we make them more welcoming and inclusive? And some of that intervention, well, some of that effort was present in our work as part of the Women at Web Network. The Women at Web Network was an assembly of 5 different countries within the region, working towards addressing issues concerned to creating a more safer online space, a more inclusive online space for purposes of education, economic opportunity, policy, and various other endeavors aimed at creating a more inclusive digital society for women particularly, and at the time we were focusing on West Africa. So that's some of the efforts we've been doing. We have also done work around digital security. We have worked with female journalists, female politicians on enhancing their digital security practices and creating an avenue for them to turn to in the event of anything. So that is part of the nature of work that we have done as an organization, not only by ourselves, but with an extended network of collaborators from Uganda, across the continent, and quite often beyond, which is why we're excited to see some familiar faces in this discussion, faces that have been a part of our journey in addressing these concerns, recipients of the skills that we have worked with this effect, but also fantastic to see some new names joining us in this conversation as we grow what we have come to call the Internet Freedom Africa community. So for purposes of this discussion, please remember to tweet the hashtag, Internet Freedom Africa and Tech for Equality. Those are our two running hashtags for this conversation. And on that note, I would like to hand over to Lillian, who is going to take over the conversation from here. But once again, welcome to all of you. We are pleased to have you here. Please do share your Q&As, your questions rather, if you have any in the chat function, but also share online. We will be monitoring your contributions there as well. Once again, remember to tweet using the hashtag Internet Freedom Africa and Tech for Equality. Thank you. Lillian, over to you.
Thank you, Juliet. Let me try to turn on my video. Thank you so much, Juliet, for the wonderful introduction. And also thank you to our wonderful panelists for honoring our invite to be part of this interesting conversation about gender equity, equality, how can we improve, how can we contribute for meaningful access to women, to digital technologies, especially for women. I think I've already lost some 30 minutes, and Juliet has set the scene on what we should be focusing on and what needs to be done in improving equality for women. So as a theme to this, for this year, which is focusing at digital innovation and technology for gender equality, we have, yes, we had policy makers, we have activists, we have also innovators on this. So starting with the person who is miles away from us, yet so near, I'll start with Honorable Nima, who I would like to have us kickstart the conversation. Of course, in a way that I don't want to frame, making it obvious, but as a member of parliament, but also as a woman, who is actively involved, in digital conversations, policy, and practice. Honorable Nima, what can you tell us about, your digital journey, and how are you pushing or implementing the gender inclusion in ICT policy and governance? Of course, here you could talk about the work that you're doing with APNIC. So Honorable Nima, I would like to start with you with that question. How is your digital journey? How has it been for you? Are there any key issues that we should be looking at when we are looking at gender inclusion in ICT policy and governance?
Thank you very much, Lillian. And I'll do my best to tackle that huge, huge topic you just threw at me right there. So first of all, what I can say is that I've been an active user of digital tools, but also ICT, etc., prior to being a member of parliament, and even after being a member of parliament. And the first thing that struck me in the differences between the two is the sheer online abuse that is subjected to women leaders and women in politics, particularly. When you're not in it, you may hear about it, but it's different when you actually experience it and live it. It hits home more. So that in itself pushed me to kind of understand, why is it the case? You know, what are the policies saying, and what is the tech environment also saying or looking at the issue of online abuse, particularly also to women in politics? Because as a result of the online abuse that is subjected to us as women in politics, there is a huge digital gender gap amongst women leaders, in the sense that we're not online. So if we're not online, we're not visible. If we're not visible, we're not aware of the ongoings of the different topics and things that we need to be aware of, so that it can inform our own policy decisions and legislation advocacy in our respective parliaments. That's number one. But number two, as a tech enthusiast, as you rightly said, I've been participating a lot in different tech-related engagements. And I also came to realize that there is a gap in the inclusion of parliamentarians in those discussions. Whilst when we're talking about strengthening technology for equality, there's an element that at the end of the day, we can do so much, but it reaches a point where we need policy and legislation reform. But if parliamentarians' engagement is not where it should be, it means that even there will be a knowledge gap on our side as legislators. And that is what pushed me to say, okay, can we come together as African parliamentarians to capacitate our own knowledge, to be more informed, but also to engage more centrally in this topic of digital development in our continent, in Africa, so that we can be part of the solution. And that's what led to the formation of the African Parliamentary Network on Internet Governance. So we're trying to say, we are here as members of parliament, and we're still continuing to get more members. And our aim is, we want to be part of this journey. So include us in these discussions, find ways in which we can collaborate together to advance the tech policies that will be an enabling environment for everything that we are aspiring for. But thirdly, very quickly, not to take more time, is for women to take advantage of the opportunities that come forward from technology. We need to bridge the digital skill gap, digital literacy gap, because due to our usage being on a lower end, it means even our skill set is not where it should be. So we need to focus on skilling, but we also need to focus on the opportunity that it brings of trade. When we're saying tech for equality, there's a lot of opportunities that come forward. There's trade, so women can do e-business. I come from Kagera, which is bordering Uganda. Women can do cross-border trade online without even having to travel. But there's also issues. There's also issues of participating in meetings, participating in online trainings, and for them to, improve upon their own abilities. So all of these things need to be looked at. And further, we must remember also the infrastructure parts. Infrastructure is, issues of connectivity. Do we have the right electricity, the right connection, the cost of bandwidth, etc.? So all of those things need to be discussed, as one, and then look at critically at the policy situations, at the legislation situations, and bring forward realistic policy reform that can unlock the existing stumbling blocks in this area. But it's a very important area, and tech has a huge opportunity for unlocking the participation of women, but also leading to poverty eradication for women. I think I can end there for now, Lillian, and I can come again later
on. Thank you so much, Honorable Nima. I think you do raise interesting points. And on that, of course, getting your passion, it always feels nice to hear what is driving someone to do what it is they're doing. And for you, the issue of online abuse for women in politics mainly, and the huge digital skills, or gender disparity between men and women in terms of access, but especially for women in politics, I think are very huge concerns. And from where you're standing, it is not just the women in politics, but I think it's more or less of a global concern. And we are happy that we have a person like you who is coming there and putting a foot in this field. Of course, you also raise issues of need to bring digital skills, to bridge the digital skills and knowledge gap. And we are hoping that part of this conversation will be able to contribute to that skill building, because when we are here, we are sharing what can be done, what needs to be done from the different perspectives and the countries that we are in. I would like to follow up on this with, not with another legislator, but to someone who has been in the field, or is in the field, who is working around, technology, working around women. And to this, I would like to throw the mic to Ms. Nashilongo. And to you, Nashilongo, one is, I was reading some statistics here, and according to the ITU last year in November, they highlighted that 63% of women have access, are using the internet, whereas 69 compared to 69% of the men. And whereas it shows there's a bit of, the difference is not that much when you look at 69 and 63. However, looking at this year's theme, digital innovation and technology for gender equality, there's quite an alarming observation that about 75% of jobs will be related to STEM. And STEM here, we are looking at science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. However, only 20% of women have made it in that field. So from your experience, Nashilongo, do you think that, women, we are doing enough, from your countries, especially on the continent? Are we doing enough to bridge this to bring more girls in STEM or more women in STEM? And if not, what would you recommend as, and what would you recommend that what should be done in order for us to be in that 75% that has been projected for 2050? Over to you, Nashilongo.
Thank you, Lillian. Glad to see you as well. So I'm glad that you raised some of those statistics, particularly on access to the internet for women. I think for countries like Namibia, we are one of the countries in the Africa region that has a gender digital divide that is to the advantage of women. I think our gap between men and women is about 14.9%. So that means that, yes, indeed, more and more women are having access to the internet, but is it meaningful accessibility? And I think this is where we go with the question that you are asking about. How do we ensure that those who have access have meaningful access, that they are able to do work on technology, for instance, and then perhaps this is where the STEMs call comes from. From Namibia, for instance, we know that I think for the rest of the Africa region, the call for STEMs has been going on for a number of years, I think, since, the CEDAW, since, all of the many calls to ensuring equality. But has that been meaningful? Perhaps not. And that speaks to issues of data and recording that. I was just looking, we are currently doing a national assessment on internet policy and development using the ROMEX framework with UNESCO and with support from CIPESA. And we cannot find data on the amount of women or the data over the years on women who have been rightly skilled. So that means that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in making sure that, yes, that we are acknowledging those numbers, but we are also able to sort of see what are the fields that these women who have been introduced into the STEM field from high school, from university, have been able to pursue, and what kind of work are they doing. That is also particularly important for the topic and that we are celebrating this year, because once we know, for instance, how many women have been pursuing, machine learning or software engineering, then we will be able to know the kind of impact they have in ensuring, for instance, safety online for women, because once we need as many software engineers into the room to making sure that they design by default safety from a woman perspective. So a lot needs to be done in terms of actually aggregating or acknowledging that data and using that data to respond to the many challenges that the digital platforms present for women. So, and of course, that also tells us, would be able to help us sort of shape innovation or understand the amount of innovation that is happening within the countries, how many are involved. What we know, or what we see from the media coverage, for instance, from innovation perspective, we're seeing less and less women, in the startup communities who are raising the kind of funds, for instance, in ensuring that, to a certain extent, that gender equality is achieved. With STEMs, we have brilliant programs, I want to believe, from the university that I teach. We're seeing still less women in, computer science, still a number that needs to be increased in engineering, in mathematics. So that means that there must be some gaps that is happening there, and it needs data. It needs a collection of data that informs the next steps on how do we bridge this. Thanks, Lillian. Let me end here and then I'll come back a bit later.
Thank you, Nashilongo. And I think it's always nice to know that, there is something that is being done in, trying to open, into that big hole of what is happening when it comes to getting more girls and women, in the STEM fields. Building on that, I would like to, before I can go to Honorable Bagala, I would like to briefly go on to Martha, just building on what Nashilongo has been sharing. What do you think are the challenges, in addition to what she has said? Are there any other challenges that are preventing women from participating in the technology and innovation industry? And from your work, do you think there are any opportunities in this sector?
Thank you, Lillian. I switched on my video just so everybody can see me for a split second, but I'm gonna have to turn it off so I can improve the quality of my connection, because I'm quite miles out of the city. But when I think, how do we use tech to improve gender equality and improve the livelihoods of women, I think about the fact that our societies are structured around power, okay? And ICT in essence should be able to distribute that power evenly. And so in answering that question, the thought that I would throw around is, how does ICT, how does innovation, how does tech, how does the internet give power to people, but give power to women specifically? And when we give them that power, tying into the principles of the African Declaration on Internet Rights and Freedom, the right to information, the right to freedom of assembly, the right to express themselves, the right to privacy, having security and data, and the right to due process of the law. When we think about all of those things, and enabling women to have access to that kind of power? How do we ensure that they are safe to exercise that power? How do we ensure that they are not exploited, we are not abused, we're not discriminated against, we're not stereotyped? And how do we keep our information secure as well? So when we look at, hello, can you still hear me? I think I'm breaking.
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, great. Okay, so when I think about the challenges, the opportunities that exist in building up to what Nashilongo had said, for me, it's really safety concerns. Some of the biggest challenges that I can point out, safety concerns for women that are coming online. You know, once we deal with affordability, we deal with access, we deal with visibility, we deal with representation, there's a major issue of safety for women online. I think Honorable alluded to that as well. But also there's an opportunity, regardless of the challenge of safety, there's an opportunity for trade, there's an opportunity for transformation in terms of income generation, in terms of networking for women, in terms of participation in governance processes, in terms of improved quality to education, improved quality to health. But also there's an opportunity for the ICT sector, for tech, for innovation to be very intersectional in its approach. And that means centering inclusion, okay, and centering some of the feminist principles such as systemic change, so that when we look at issues such as the digital divide in areas where I am right now, where we're very close to the capital of the country, but connectivity is still a problem. There's still women who've never used a smartphone. There's still children who walk distances to school, you know, and they have no idea that there's a whole digital world out there. You know, there's issues of disability and the discrimination that comes against people that are living with disabilities, you know. So when I look at the opportunities, there's so many of them for us to build a digitally inclusive society by ensuring that all of these people and communities that are underserved are also catered to. But more importantly for me, it's also touching on a bit of the opportunities that exist when it comes to policy framework and legislation. It's that, you know, as we look at using tech to bridge the gender digital divide, to achieve equality, we should really be looking at a policy framework process that categorically defines who is speaking in that policy process. What are the topics in that policy process? Are voices of the most marginalized women, women in the rural areas, women living with disabilities, women that are targeted, like women in politics, women in media, journalists, are their voices being prioritized as we try to formulate policies that will, you know, drive the development agenda? Women's views are underrepresented in almost all topic categories, okay? It's not only gender equality across the board. How do we ensure that processes are not gender blind, that they do not perpetuate blatant or subtle stereotypes when it comes to how practical we are when we say ICTs are going to help us build a digitally inclusive community. So I do think that there are a lot of challenges, but there are also a lot of opportunities, as long as we recognize the imbalances and inequalities that exist, and also deliberately work towards ensuring that women's experiences are the center and focus of whatever it is that we are building, whether it's policy, whether it's innovation, whether it's empowering women to find income for themselves, or to be digitally literate, or to be digitally skilled. Is that their experiences and their thought processes should be encouraged, especially when it comes to formulating policy. I hope that answers your question, Lillian, but I'll be able to come back a little later.
Thank you, Martha. Of course, you raise interesting points, but also what I've captured is the need, you know, to recognize, yes, these disparities do exist, but we also have to equally work ourselves off to make sure that, you know, we are meeting halfway with these disparities. And in that, we need to be intentional in whatever we are doing. We just don't walk in because we want this to happen, but we have to be intentional, and intentionality brings action. Of course, now here, I would like to bring in another, you know, interesting voice, and this is Honorable Joyce Bagala. As a member of parliament and also a shadow minister of ICT in Uganda, Uganda is having lots of investments. Every day you hear there's an investment, you know, in digitalization of projects and programs by the government. From your view and from your perspective, to what extent do these initiatives enhance the active participation of girls and women in technology or in pursuit of, you know, further digital innovation? And again, you could also share, you know, your perspective on if there's any particular legislation that you've come across in Uganda or in Africa or in anywhere along your work that, you know, is in place to, you know, to empower women, you know, in the digital movement. Honorable Bagala, I'll pass the mic to you.
Well, thank you very much, Lillian, and I'd like to apologize. I know I've been on and off. I can tell you that I have moved about 7 places in the office to find internet, and that's why I failed to connect on my laptop, and I'm using my phone. So I really would like to apologize, and I know that I have backlight in my picture. I may have to change again after this because it's a bit complicated, but I hope that they can hear me. Probably I can just get off the video so they can only listen to the voice. Yeah, you talk about the Ugandan picture. The Ugandan picture is not so different from other parts of Africa. Of course, what do I make of the many investments, especially in the digital transformation? You know that Uganda moved away from output-based budgeting to program-based budgeting, and the ICT sector falls under digital transformation. But I can tell you, when it comes to digital transformation and women, we still have a very long way. In terms of women, because now the ICT ministry has a permanent secretary who is a woman. We have the Uganda Communications Commission headed by a woman, but also in acting capacity. But most of the people in the state minister for ICT is a woman. But if you want to understand how the Ugandan woman, the ordinary Ugandan woman, gets habits, gets to do things, most of the time they get examples from leaders. And if our leaders are not even embracing technology, how do you expect an ordinary Ugandan woman to embrace technology? But also, if you look at the expense of data in Uganda, data is very expensive. So you will find women are poorer than men. Women are paid less than men. So it is very difficult for them to afford data to be on the internet. I had the Honorable Member of Parliament talking about the abuse, online abuse. Again, you don't talk about investment when women are being abused online, when women are being harassed online. I know, Lillian, that you are aware of how many nude pictures of women have been out there. And these women have been forced to be off the internet, to abandon the internet. So there's no way they are going to benefit from these kinds of investments. But also talk about corruption. This is no secret in Uganda. If all these investments are here and they're all marred by corruption, how do you expect the women to benefit from these investments when there's corruption? Talk about infrastructure, ICT infrastructure. You know that we still have issues there. I would like to acknowledge that the ministry thinks that we need to invest heavily in infrastructure, internet infrastructure, which is very good. I agree with the ministry, but then are we going to get the value are we going to get the value of those investment? You know that even if you wanted to put internet in places like Mityana, where I come from, if there are many places in Mityana that don't have electricity, then how can you think about investment in the digital world without electricity? Because you need to have electricity to be able to be switched on to use the internet. There are many things that we need to talk about. We talk about skilling of women and girls, and you know that most of the schools, if you're investing in computer labs, those schools do not have electricity to start with. Those schools do not have science laboratories to start with. How then do you go into the investment of computer labs when the basics are not available? Then Lillian, you talked about laws. There's no law when it comes to technology. There are other laws about privacy, the computer misuse, which doesn't act. I've never seen anyone. I told you about the how many men, most especially. I won't say that women do not publish nude pictures of men, but mostly has been done by men. And you have not seen any case being prosecuted to conclusion or to completion. And then women have nothing to do but to shy away from using technology. The other but very important issue is about governance. The issue of governance in Uganda is a critical matter. It is something that I talk about all the time, because if the government has the will to invest in technology, then we'll have technology. Then more women will be investing in technology. Then more women will be included. That tech inclusion will happen. But the issue of governance is a very important matter, where the government will invest more, not in the technology world, but probably in security, in the military, because the government is looking at itself for sustainability, for clinging on to power, rather than the other issues. You know that during the last elections, Facebook was switched off. Up to now, Ugandans only use Facebook with VPN, which means it's more expensive because then you use more data. And all those women who would embrace Facebook to sell, to advertise, cannot, because they cannot afford. So it is such a problem. I was talking about the skills on International Women's Day. The celebrations happened in Kiruhura district, one of the districts in Uganda, and the president was there, and he was advising that people should take their children, especially girls, to good schools. And this government has never even built one girls' school. How then do you tell people to take their children to good schools? Which good schools? You need to encourage people to take their children to schools that have tech services. When you have built those schools, when there's infrastructure, when those schools are there, but they're not even available. The available schools are very expensive. And you know what? Most of the children are brought up by women. And these women cannot afford those very expensive schools or the good schools that the president was talking about, which can offer skills in technology. So there are many challenges. In terms of talking, in terms of paper, in terms of policy, you can say that Uganda is doing well. In fact, the government talks about ICT as one of the pillars for economic and social transformation. But practically, that is not what is on the ground. There's a whole lot of contrast between what is on paper, between what is said, and what actually is being done. Lillian.
Yes, I'm here. I just keep switching off my video because I realized when I switch it on, kind of, we kind of lose you. There's some bit of disruption. So I wanted us to have a clearer voice.
Yeah, because I already told you that my internet is very poor. So you can clearly see from what is even happening to me, because I am even very ashamed to say where I am, but I am in office at Parliament, and the internet is very poor and very slow. And you can imagine if in the capital, the internet is that slow, how then other rural women can take part, can be included in the tech world. So there are lots of issues that need to be addressed in terms of implementing the laws and the policies, but also some of the laws, you know, that the computer misuse, there's a section that was scrapped when you talk about freedom of expression, because you talk about the tech world and freedom of expression. If you're using your computer, the computer is actually the phone now, and you have to be very worried about how you're going to use it, about what you're going to say with it. And then in the end, some people will just abandon it. So I can say that in Uganda, and indeed in Africa, it's not yet a time to celebrate women and technology or gender equality in terms of technology.
Thank you so much, Honorable Joyce. Hope I can address you by your first name. Thank you so much.
Yes, it's very okay. It's very okay.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for those insightful observations about the status of the online gender perspective in Uganda. Of course, you echo what Honorable Nima has talked about, the issues of, you know, online abuse, plus what everyone else talked about, online abuse, access, but I think what I had here came in as the cost of data, you know, the challenges that are in Uganda, you know, the blockages, Facebook at that, and people having to use a VPN. And, you know, you can use any VPN, but for you to use a reliable VPN, it kind of, you know, you have to either pay for it, which is a cost issue, but also when you're using a VPN, it consumes more of your data. So this is also a cost issue. And I think there's been quite a number of, you know, studies on how women are using technology and what are the challenges, you know, that are coming out of, you know, of them not being able to achieve, to fully utilize the digital platforms. I would right now, before we go into the discussion, I think we are a bit 26 minutes into towards the end of our webinar. I would like to request listeners, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A section. We'll pick them from there. But I would like to go back to Honorable Nima. I know it's probably now 4 a.m. Just to share, for you to share for us, with us, some of the perspectives that are coming out from that huge gathering that is happening in New York, that we can pick on as the people who are pushing for gender equality in technology for women in Africa. How can we enhance this equality in Africa, following on the conversations that are currently happening, you know, there?
Thank you very much, Lillian. And I think I would first like to state the importance of collaboration and partnership between tech CSOs, you know, civil society, as well as other feminist organizations and organizations that are pushing for, you know, gender equality and gender inclusion in different aspects. I'm grateful to be here at the CSW 67 New York, and this is through partnership and support that I got from Akina Mama Africa, whom I know CIPESA knows very well. And why I'm saying this, first, I'm acknowledging their support, but secondly, it's oftentimes it's very difficult to find, you know, global South voices being represented in the global North agenda. So it is important for civic tech, civil society to collaborate with us, even as legislators, because it's an opportunity, a capacity building opportunity for being here physically, but also it's an opportunity to voice our thoughts that will shape the global agenda that naturally has an impact on our African agenda, regional agenda, and even at national level. Now, the main topics at the CSW so far, believe it or not, the issue of online abuse, online violence, technology-facilitated gender-based violence has been kind of paramount across many of the sessions, which goes to show that at global level, it has been recognized that everything can be done. But if the online space is not safe for women and girls to be on it, then it's going to be all for nothing. That's number one. But number two, there's also been a huge discussion on how technology also brings about issues of human and particularly child trafficking, and the sexual exploitation that also happens online. So this is another angle that I feel that as legislators and as civil society, it's important to also look at the other side of the coin. The other issue that has been widely spoken about is the issue of digital rights. Digital rights in all aspects, things of like internet shutdown. I know that's a great topic. One of big topics for CIPESA, digital democracy, but even the issue of freedom of expression, and in the sense that there needs to be clear definition of what is permissible under freedom of expression and what then is no longer freedom of expression but becomes abuse. But there is also a big call for legislating the digital space, because in many of our countries, the digital space is not legislated. Yes, many African countries are having data protection acts, but how are they speaking together? Because we have regional agreements. But there's also the issue that has also come up very clearly is the issue of taxation. You know, with technology, it also brings about an opportunity for tax evasion. And it may not be purposeful tax evasion, but just tax evasion in the sense that most of the big tech companies do not have offices in our countries. So how then does the taxation come into play? So I think in a nutshell, to be honest, the CSW has been a huge learning experience for me, but it has also solidified that the world has recognized that in order to truly advance, gender equality and empowerment, digital and technology is paramount in that sense. And that calls on organizations like CIPESA and others to continuously figure out what sort of policy and legislation will be needed to ensure that Africa is not left behind. Thank you, Lillian.
Thank you, Honorable Nima. I think we are very happy that you're there. We are pleased that you're there to, get into, what's happening at the global scene and see how we can kind of, learn and benchmark from other actors to improve what is happening, not just on the continent, but also at our national levels. For those who probably don't know, CSW is the Commission on the Status of Women, and this year is being held in New York, and it started on 6th and is ending on 17th of this month, and it's being held under the theme Innovation and Technology Change and Education in the Digital Age for Achieving Gender Equality and Empowerment of All Women and Girls. So we are happy that we have a voice that is there to be part of, this conversation. Of course, Honorable Nima from a practitioner, but also as a member of parliament is really very, very helpful for us to capture, these conversations and see how we can learn from that. So,
sorry, Lillian.
Yes,
sorry, Lillian. I just wanted to add one of my biggest call to actions over here has been for the UN Women to truly, fully recognize online abuse as a type of GBV. Because at the moment, yes, UN Women is talking about it, but it doesn't fully come out that online abuse, online violence, digital violence is a type of GBV. And very quickly, I saw on the Twitter someone posted that ITU recent report shows, who's following this conversation, shows that 63% of women and 69% of men have access to internet. So the post was trying to say that, so the gap seems to be small. I think it's important when we're looking at these statistics to be very clear on what was the comparison on. This 63 versus 69, where was it? Is it in Europe? Is it in Africa? Does it take into account rural or the last mile communities? And I think that's where CIPESA, you can come into helping us in making sure that we use proper data to communicate the issue. Because I'm sure you and I and everybody on this call knows that the gap, the digital the access in Africa is not 63% to 69%. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Nima. I think, yeah, you raised very valid point on the need for, data, to have this what's the word? Disintegrated data, of course, earlier on I mentioned those statistics. However, we recognize that this is at a global level. In Africa, where we are still lagging behind in access when it comes to women, it's a different issue altogether. And of course, very important to hear the calls for collaboration between different actors, whether it's the legislators, whether it is, private sector, the techie companies, and also the issue of online safety being at the forefront, that if these spaces are not safe, then there's no way we are going to encourage more people joining and more women joining, considering the kind of, abuse that is existing. I'm looking at the time now, and I recognize that we have about 15 minutes. So I would like to quickly jump into the chat and see if there are any responses or questions that need to be addressed. And I'll draw up the questions, but I would also like to see if there are any questions that are directed to the panelists. I'll pick on from one from Brenda Namata, who says that, thank you, dear panelists, for the strong futuristic deliberations. My name is Brenda Namata, Communications and Advocacy Officer, Uganda Media Women's Association. And she says that one of the strong setbacks for gender responsiveness, both online and offline for women, are gender-blind laws and policies related to media and its regulation in Uganda. So I think this is a question to you, Honorable Joyce. She says, Honorable Joyce Bagala, how can civil society influence and advocate through the legislative processes to have media regulation, which includes digital access, to be gender responsive to these challenges? UMWA, that is the Uganda Media Women's Association, has done a gender critique of media-related laws, and there are strong gaps. With the Information and Communications Bill prospect, it will be first enable of having policy respond to OGBV issues. Honorable Bagala, would you like to react to this?
Well, thank you very much. And like I told you, I may not be able to put my video. I already told you the challenge, but I hope they can hear me. I'd like to appreciate Brenda for being part of this conversation, and in a very special way to appreciate the Uganda Women Media Association. They are doing very good work with especially women journalists. And there's so many things that the civil society can do. Civil society can do so much to influence these issues to do with gender responsiveness in terms of technology, because even putting together data, you see, according to the UN Women and United Nations, women make up only 22% of artificial intelligence workers globally. And if that is the case, then the gap is, the gender bias is very wide. But also there's a survey of women journalists that was done in 125 countries. And it found that 73% had suffered online violence in the course of their work. having been a journalist myself, I know this for sure. And I know that Brenda also knows that. I know that Uganda Women Media Association has tried to do something, but there are also other civil society that can do more, especially in terms of training, in terms of capacity building for journalists, because the journalists will, now I'm talking to the Uganda Women's Media Association, because for them, they're mainly into the media and women. But even other civil societies, other civil society groups can do much, like CIPESA, because CIPESA is involved with the internet and technology. They can do so much in terms of training for women, but also training for legislators, especially women legislators, because then when they're bringing these laws, it is our duty to have the mind of gender, to see how this law is going to impact women, how this law is going to include women, how this law is going to protect women. It is our duty as women legislators, but also as civil society. I'll speak very briefly about the opposition, which I represent. The critic of our policy, or of the government policy, we have always told them to deal with gender issues when it comes to policy. And the only problem that we have is these issues have not been implemented. We would like for issues like affirmative action for female applicants to innovation funds in Uganda to be fairly implemented. You know, because the applicants to the innovation funds, most of them are males. When you ask for the numbers, they'll tell you, you'll see a whole list of about 20 people with only about 3 women. And that is unfair. Then specializing ICT literacy training for the women and girl child. It's very important. Then involving Ugandan women and girls in global technology revolution through granting them access and control of technology, which is still very low in Uganda, but not just Uganda, the rest of Africa. The government has been talking about mindset change. I don't know how that works. For me, I think the issue of putting up infrastructure is much better than the mindset change, because even if the mind of a woman has been changed, when there's no infrastructure, then there's going to be a problem. And in this, the government must allow private-public partnerships in terms of infrastructure. And then that's where the civil society can come in to partner with government in putting together this infrastructure that can help include women in the tech world and so many others. But I'd like to appreciate Brenda for being part of the discussion.
Thank you so much, Honorable Joyce. And I think, yes, you've raised, you know, the technology policy gaps, you know, access to innovation funds, you know, who is accessing, what is the percentage, you know, of the girls or women that are accessing these funds. Again, it goes back to one of the issues that I think Martha mentioned on the accessing data, and I think also this was also mentioned by Nashilongo, accessing data, you know, trying to measure what is happening to assess that. But of course, also on the issue of being intentional when addressing these gaps or this inequality. When it comes to literacy, how do we go about this? And, you know, focus, what percentage are we allocating, you know, the number of participants, you know, say female participants. So very interesting points.
Sorry, Lillian.
Yes,
sorry,
yes.
Lillian. I just wanted to come in and maybe contribute just a little bit more on Brenda's question around gender responsiveness as it relates to the media and women in the media and journalists, if that's okay.
Sure, please go on. And also, I do encourage you to pick up on any of the questions that are in the Q&A, so that I avoid reading them out loud in the interest of time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Brenda, thank you so much for your question. I believe it's a very, very important question. And just building on the answer that you've just been given, I think that part of the responsibility of those of us in the media, or those of us who've had a bit of background or our work is centered around the media, is really taking up the responsibility to ensure that our communities and the people that receive what we are putting out as media understand that, gender in essence is about the existing power relations between male and females, okay? And that has placed women in particular, or those that have been assigned to sex female, to be in a subordinate position, okay? So when you come at issues from that perspective, it helps already as the media highlighting that there's an imbalance that we are dealing with here. And I think it also then becomes very important to deconstruct things around language in terms of how women's issues are represented in the media, language around the family structure, language around religion, language around tradition and culture, social constructions, marriage, culture. All of those are issues that sort of contribute to the blindness that exists, especially when it comes to formulating policies that will guide either the media or any other community in the society. So I think one of the important things coming from a media perspective is always to probe what are the key gender issues that are emerging. Have we done a situational analysis? Are the decision makers that are formulating those policies actually gender sensitive? Because if they're not gender sensitive, they will not be gender responsive, and also just asking, are the key implementers of these policies familiar with gender issues? And if they are not, what is our responsibility as the media to ensure that they become aware of what the gender issues are and they contribute to effective implementation of policies around women, around ICT and media? And also just highlighting how gender neutral structures are, whether job descriptions, institutional structures, it becomes partly our responsibility to highlight those gaps so that the people who are in the forefront of policy making actually become gender aware, because only then can we have a gender responsive policy or environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. There's quite a lot of intense questions in the Q&A. And there was one from, let me see. I'm not being selective, but I'm seeing on one of the issues that may not have been responded to yet, or it has not been talked about, is the question from Kuza. Is it Kunzai? Sorry if I mispronounce your name. And I was hoping that Honorable Nima could respond to that, or any of the other panelists, either Nashilongo or Honorable Nima or Martha, anyone can respond to that. The issue of what sort of legal processes says that are kind of resonate across jurisdictions. Honorable Nima?
Lillian.
Whoever goes. All right.
Lillian, the question is, they want to know the legal reforms, or can you just be more clear? Because I didn't see the question on the chats.
Sorry. This is about Ndashilongo, please. You can.
Okay,
yes.
go first.
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Kudzai, for that question. I've just shared with you one of the resources that highlights particularly on legal processes that across different jurisdictions. So this research in particular was carried out in 8 African countries. One of the projects that we also got support from the Africa Digital Rights Fund under CIPESA. So what we found out in particular with this eight country research, we found out one, that at the legal processes within all of these 8 countries, that the languages of the laws that are being used to prosecute cases related to the internet, or to cases related to the violence that is emanating from the internet or from the digital space, is very, very vague. In most of the time, even when the cases are brought to court, rather, does not necessarily bring recourse to the victims of the violences that happens online. One of the findings that we found and was particularly interesting from Malawi was that there's actually a law, supposedly a very progressive law that is protecting women, and that law is actually being used to prosecute women online. I think one of the issues there was related to, I think, issues of nudity, issues of I'm just trying to find the correct words, but yeah, decency, things that are quite vague even from a policy perspective. So I hope that that law, or rather that resource, helps you to a certain direction. But I also want to reflect even from our perspective in Namibia, that in many of the cases, the laws are quite silent on online violence. They are again very vague when they happen. But also in terms of the processes themselves, we found out that police officers, for instance, aren't very trained, aren't well trained in handling online violence issues. We have a number of cases in that report, but also other reports that we've done locally, where, for instance, a young woman went to the police to report a specific case about being harassed online by a former boyfriend or so. And, when the police first start laughing at what is this that you are reporting, then they tell you to go and call this person that is harassing you and bring them to the police station. And most of the case, sometimes they will call, the person comes and they are warned verbally, and they go and delete those posts that they've made, and few months later, the person comes online again and continue the abuses, for instance. And so we have many of those. And I think there was one particular incident that dealt with a journalist. Again, it was during some of the election time. I can't remember if there was a Botswana case or South African case. And, the journalist reported the case to the management or the news management, with the help of news management, reported the case at the police. The police was only able to identify, for instance, where the person bought the SIM card or the SIM card that was used to create the Facebook profile. And that's it. I think the police couldn't do further, because I think that person didn't use that card anymore, and they deleted their profile account that they used to harass a specific journalist by telling them that they're going to rape them and they're going to kill them. And I think few months later, again, that person creates another account and the abuse continues. So the processes themselves are not very clear. One, because the judiciary itself needs to be sensitized on how online violence happens and what it entails. From Namibia, for instance, when we interviewed the cybercrime unit, they responded that they were not capacitated. So there is a lot of issues on capacity, the legal reform processes and policies that really speaks to those issues. I don't know if Kudzai that answers the question at this point.
Thanks, Silondo. Yes, sorry, I keep cutting you.
No, it's okay.
To respond to another question.
Wait. Yes, I'll just briefly also add on what Shilongo said. Earlier, when you said the question, I didn't know if it was related to the legal process in what aspect, because when for tech and digital and online space, there's a lot. So I wasn't sure if it's online abuse or cybersecurity, like theft and things like that. But adding on to what Nashilongo said, I think the biggest issue is, one, there are currently cybercrime laws. And in cybercrime laws, it's not very clear, it's not explicitly clear on how to tackle the issue of online abuse. So to be honest, if you're a victim of online abuse, and if you look at the Cybercrime Act in most of our countries, it's not very easy to pinpoint how you can get your justice from how it's written. So one of the things that I'm pushing for is, and we can take a learning from European countries and even Brazil, is for our countries to have standalone specific acts on addressing online abuse, online violence, digital violence, technology facilitated GBV. Call it whatever name, but there needs to be a standalone act that clearly addresses the issue of online abuse. That's number one. But number two, in the case of us as women in politics, the other thing that I'm pushing for is to get reform in political parties acts and elections acts, so that these two acts can recognize online abuse, and it can be one of the acts that can lead to someone being removed off a candidacy list. I think those two aspects can also bring justice to a lot of the victims of online abuse. Nashilongo spoke about capacitating the judiciary, but I'm of the opinion that judiciary works on laws that have been created by legislators. So we need to go a step back and also make sure we capacitate parliamentarians who create those laws that in turn judiciary has to work on. And then in the case of Tanzania, very quickly, we're very fortunate to have, the only sitting president and head of state who's a female, Her Excellency Dr. Samia Suluhu Hassan. And she's a big champion of gender equality, a big champion of digital and technology use. And she's been promoting the use of even the government providing different services through taking advantage of technology. And this also brings an opportunity when we're talking about digital skills to making sure that we don't forget all groups, including the elderly. Because if most services are going to be, digitally available, then it's important also to include all groups, including people with disability, the elderly, in our digital skills efforts. But another thing that our government is trying to do under the leadership of Her Excellency President Dr. Samia Suluhu Hassan is to also accelerate digital inclusion and finding different avenues of promoting digital inclusion. And Tanzania this year will be co-host of the Midpoint Gender Equality Forum. So it's very exciting times in Tanzania. So I hope also all of you will be able to participate in that process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Nima. I'm looking at the clock, and I want to see if there are any kind of pending questions or issues that have not been addressed. But I think most of them have been addressed. Although I would like, before I pass on the mic to each and every one of the panelists, I would like to quickly go back to Honorable Joyce. And I realize most of the comments that are there, the questions are coming from Uganda. And just a quick one, is there anything, any of the questions you'd like to address to? Maybe I can read one from Milton Emi Akwam. And she says that she's aware of the poor internet connectivity in Uganda, but apart from connectivity, the poor connectivity, data remains too high for the rural women, even those who are in towns. What trust can women and girls in Uganda have on you to ensure internet equality? I know this is quite a big kind of question, but I think we can frame it in a way. What trust can we have, in our probably legislators to ensure that there's internet equality, not necessarily in Uganda, but maybe across the region? So once you respond to this, maybe we could go on to give our departing rather closing remarks, and then yes, we can see how we can continue the conversation elsewhere. Honorable Joyce.
Well, thank you very much, Lillian. And I'd like to thank all the people, especially in Uganda, who are taking part in the discussion. The ICT, the technology discussion is very important for the transformation of our countries, not just Uganda, but the rest of Africa, but also globally. You know that the other countries across the globe are a bit far from us in Africa, and we need to catch up. So in any case, we still grapple with accessing reliable statistics, and especially in ICT. So we need to have that. Then the challenges are many. We still have to address unemployment of youths and graduates, as well as to increase access of the usage of ICT among its communities. But like she said, the issues of poor internet are very, very prevalent in Uganda, but also the expense of data. We have, and I'll speak for the opposition where I am, we have severally advised the government that in order for for a country to have inclusion of women in the technology world, we need to bring down the cost of data because women are generally poor. So if they can't afford basics in life, if they can't afford health services, if they can't afford, some of them cannot even afford 3 meals a day, if the internet is still expensive, my dear, the women will not be part of a technological world. So I think that's very important for our government to listen and to understand. All the other issues can be worked on as long as the cost, even affording a handset. And the women, I was talking today on a morning show on TV about women who cannot afford sanitary towels. How do you expect that kind of woman to now afford a handset? First of all, we need to reduce taxes on these handsets, especially those that are manufactured in the country, to encourage more people to access them. And to access them means they can then access the other services. Because before you get the handset, how then can you access other services like the internet? They need to own smartphones to be able to have internet. So the cost is very important, and the government can hear this. Our job as legislators is to ensure that the cost is low. The job of the government is to listen to us. Yeah, thank you, Lillian. I think that's what I can say for now. I've talked about the issues of infrastructure, which is very poor, which is still very low. But I also talked about the public-private sector partnership for the internet to come down. The government, through UTL, which is now fully under the government, can allow private companies like telecoms to be able to play in this tech field so that the internet can come down because they provide this internet to the people.
Thank you, Honorable Joyce. I think you've responded to most of the questions, especially those coming from the Ugandan perspective. There was some question on access to the Information Act, but I also, because it says this poses a major challenge, limitations to it.
Lillian, on the issue of access to information, there's an Access to Information Act, but I already spoke, I think, in my introduction about the issue of governance. Some of the issues in Uganda, especially to do with freedom of expression, issues to do with information, have everything to do with governance. And I'm sorry that when you talk about governance, you're going to talk about politics. For some of us, we believe that it is intentional for some of these, for some of the information to not be accessed. It is intentional by the government, and that's why we think some of the issues are governance, and we believe we need to change the government to be able to do certain things the way Ugandans would want. For instance, the oil agreements where the public is not even aware what is in the oil agreements. How then can the public participate? How can they be included? How can they be involved if they do not know what is there? So there's a lot, the issue of governance is very important in all the things that we're talking about. The laws could be there. Are they implemented? When you talk about cyber security, cyber laws, our police, the CID, Does it have enough money? Do they have the skills to even investigate these issues? Do they have internet anyway? Do they have the gadgets anyway? So, I mean, we need to look at all that. Even when you go to issues of budget, still you go back to the governance question.
Thank you, Honorable Joyce. I think we've exhausted most of the angles or most of the points or issues that we set out to, to get. Of course, this conversation can go on because we all have amazing ideas. We have all this, but it all comes to governance. It starts with political leadership, but also goes on, for some issues of, say, safety and all that, it begins with us. I would like to end the conversation, but I see there are two hands that are raised. Elizabeth, Grace, and Lois. Are you raising issues that have not been talked about? I can give you 2 minutes or 1 minute to raise an issue before we can conclude. So Elizabeth, please. Elizabeth, someone, the host, can help me unmute her. So
she has the permission to talk.
Okay, Elizabeth, I think that is an old hand because it has been up for the last few minutes. Lois, are you able to say something? Okay, I guess they are not able to speak, so I'll close off that. Yes, so I think most of the questions have been addressed. I would like to now give the floor back to our panelists to give us closing remarks. What are your departing thoughts on what can be done? What that one special thing from your perspective that needs to be done to address the gender digital equality gap. Yes, I'll start with Martha, and then I'll go with Nashilongo, Honorable Nima, and Honorable Joyce. So Martha.
Thank you so much, Lillian. Just to echo a very important point in closing that Honorable Nima mentioned, we do need to capacitate parliamentarians, especially from a policy perspective, and that's where I'm going to end my discussion today. It's that for us to have an inclusive ICT policy and governance environment, we need to assert women's agency, and a few things that need to happen in order for this to take place is, one, to be aware that equality is important, and that refers to the norms, the values, the attitudes, the perceptions that are required to attain equal status between men and women. And we do need fairness in terms of women and men's access to socioeconomic resources. But also, most importantly, it's very, very important for gender awareness to be at the center of all policy making processes, and also for gender balance to be at the center, which means participation of an equal number of women and an equal number of men within any activity, any government institution, any media institution that is advocating for rights, and also for us to get rid of gender biases, because those are usually the underlying premise of economic analysis. So I think those are a few things that I would like to see happen. Of course, we need disaggregated data on gender. We need to ensure that all the disparities are dealt with. And in closing, just to say thank you to CIPESA again for the amazing work that you do, for all the capacity building, for all the resources, the tools, the skills that you transfer to so many organizations, so many institutions, and so many community members such as myself, who are then able to go out there and transfer those skills and resources to other people. Thoroughly enjoyed this conversation and hope to hear more of such happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martha. Nashilongo?
Thank you. So in closing, Lillian, I just want to highlight a couple of things that for all of us who are on this call, that we call on our governments to ensure that access to technology and also access to the internet in general is ensured for both rural and urban communities, wherever you are. But also that there's a need for governments, countries to ensure that digital literacy programs are perhaps the next step in ensuring that people gain skills. I've always given this example, and I was talking also to our television program this week, where I was just highlighting that, you know, when I was growing up, just upon Namibia's independence, 1990, we had this digital literacy programs where my grandmother, for instance, was attending those classes. So why don't we have those new classes for, you know, from a digital perspective, where communities, even in rural areas, have access to skills, they can gain skills that old people in the rural areas are able to sell, you know, their marula oil to buyers wherever they are in Sweden and where not. But also additional skills, even for girls, and particularly girls in rural areas, such as coding skills, for instance. I believe this will contribute to reducing unemployment in the long run, but also stimulate innovation and uplift communities in general. There's also a need to enforce regulatory frameworks for lowering data, but also zero rating services that are key for women. The other time we were doing a research in Namibia, and we found out that not even civil societies within the countries have information that is pointing girl children to, you know, the most friendliest health services, you know, facilities where a girl can go and get, you know, access to birth control and, you know, just that kind of information. But also let me highlight the need for regulatory sandboxes for dealing with online services, that online violences, that we should not be, you know, waiting to go with the traditional laws and the traditional forms of finding recourses for victims of online violences, and that policymakers, they need to be pushing for gendered data that is clearing, that is very clear in ensuring protection in languages that is supportive towards women. From the African Union, for instance, as our regional body, there's a need to inform the African Declaration on Internet Rights and Freedoms, and to ensure that that is streamlined into national policies to ensure that Africans have better access to services. Please allow me, Lillian, if you have time, that I also want to just highlight the needs for private sector to be engaging constantly in online or technology educations for building technology skills and funding innovation. But because this is a business, this brings business imperative for them. Of course, for civil society, you know, continuing with creating means and building awarenesses, empowering communities with skills and information. But that we also acknowledge that that comes with, you know, funding that is always very rare. We've worked, I think, on the region with platforms. We always question the level of transparency that we're getting from platforms in working with organization and contributing to ensuring that women particularly are protected online. We need to know, for instance, how many of the cases are emanating from Namibia that are reported at platform levels about online violences. That transparency is lacking. That information is not coming through, even when it's requested. So platforms have a role to play. I think the media should also be capacitated enough to understand technology and technology reporting. We've seen from Namibia, for instance, where you know, news about technology, news about digital rights is just presented differently. So we've always praised organizations like CIPESA that raised awareness to that extent, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done. And that work cannot be only done by your CIPESA alone, but by many others as well. But raise awareness from the media and educate communities. Of course, the academia cannot be left alone to produce knowledge that informs the policy-making processes and compelling them to make sure that the policies that are set out are protecting of the people, but are also empowering the citizens. Thanks again, Lillian, and thanks to the CIPESA team. We always appreciate a chance to be engaging. I think, like Martha has said, we were capacitated. I'm possibly one of the people that were capacitated through the many programs that CIPESA has, and we appreciate that and continue doing the great work. Thank you.
Thank you, Nashilongo, and thank you for those good remarks regards to CIPESA. We'll continue to build capacity, but also see how we can positively contribute to developing the ICT sector in Africa. Honorable Nima, your departing remarks?
First of all, thank you so much for CIPESA for organizing this very important discussion and for all the great work that you're doing in advancing technology, gender equality, and all the different moving pieces that you're doing that will ultimately contribute towards increasing our participation as women and girls, but also taking advantage of all the opportunities that come forward. My concluding remark is that I think all of this and today's discussion has further amplified the importance of collaboration between the different key stakeholders, collaboration between civil society and private sector, collaboration between civil society and judiciary, civil society and parliamentarians, but also the collaborations between, all the groups together, civil society, private sector, judiciary, legislators, and even the users. I think it's important if we have and we strengthen that collaboration, then we'll all have a better understanding, and that will then inform our different interventions. But on behalf of the African Parliamentary Network on Internet Governance, APNIC, I would just like to reaffirm our commitment to continue collaborating together on this important discussion, so that as African parliamentarians, we are going to be at the forefront and at the center of the discussions of digital development in Africa, and for Africa not to play catch up, but we need to start thinking and working now. Finally, artificial intelligence. I think in the next conversation, CIPESA, we should have a conversation to discuss artificial intelligence. How is Africa getting ready, and how are we going to protect ourselves? How are we going to have legislation in place that will ensure that we're not going to find ourselves in a manipulative situation through artificial intelligence? How can we take advantage of artificial intelligence to inform government decision, government budgeting, and knowing where to take budgets, etc.? But also, what's the impact of artificial intelligence on democracy, especially bearing in mind that the year 2024 is it's like an election year in Africa. So those are my concluding remarks, and I look forward to engaging further. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Nima. Again, collaborations, partnerships, in addition to awareness creation, in addition to having gender responsive policies and legislations. But of course, I think I like the angle of the AI. How can we as, AI in innovation, since we are talking about the theme about, innovation and women, how can we take advantage of this new innovation to further, close the gender equality gap? Thank you so much, Honorable Nima. Honorable Joyce, your departing remarks, please.
Well, thank you so much. It's very important. And thank you, Lillian, for moderating this. I have already spoken about the laws and policies. I spoke about cost of end user services. I spoke about access, and I spoke talk about governance. So in conclusion, I think we need to allow the girl child to start their journey in technology early in their lives by promoting young ideas in schools. I think that's what is about skilling when at an early age. But we also need to get everyone involved in promoting the women in technology by looking for appropriate cooperation and collaboration for them. And then finally, we need to promote the girl child at whatever business process outsourcing, as well as other, get all that. We shall be good to go. There's still a long way, but the good thing is that the interest is much in there in the IT sector. And I think we can have this as Uganda and as Africa in general. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Honorable Joyce. And again, very interesting conversations. Only problem is time limitation, but I'm sure if we are face-to-face, we'll be now breaking for, you know, that famous cup of coffee or tea to continue the conversation. But we will always continue, we can continue the conversation online because ourselves are agents for transformation when it comes to gender equality, and especially in the digital space. And on that, I also would like to encourage us to follow the conversation through our online space on Twitter. You can tag CIPESA at CIPESA UG using, you know, the Techie for Equality, and that is the current, I think, hashtag for this year, and Internet Freedom Africa. But also look out for a Twitter space chat at the end of the month to kind of, you know, bring together all the conversations of what has been happening in this women's month, our month, you know. So thank you so much to our wonderful panelists. Always a pleasure speaking to you, seeing you. And for those who feel that the questions were not answered to your satisfaction, kindly reach out to us or reach out to any of the panelists to continue this conversation. I know there was someone who was asking about our work at CIPESA in South Sudan. I shared a resource that we did some time back, but also feel free to reach out to programs at CIPESA for all other engagements in regard to our projects. So with that, I would like to thank each and everyone, most especially our panelists, but to you, the participants, who have made it to this engaging session. And we do apologize for starting late, but I think we kind of compensated for that. The conversation was quite interesting, and I wish to convey my gratitude, sincere gratitude to Honorable Nima, you know, given the time difference, you created time to be part of this conversation, but of course, equally to everyone. So with that, thank you so much, and feel free to reach out to us and to continue this conversation in advancing, you know, women equality, gender equality, and innovation in as the theme for this year is about. So thank you so much, and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon and a very great weekend. But of course, to us who are celebrating birthdays, to the women here, thank you so much. Happy birthday in advance to you, Martha and Nachilongo, and continue being the powerful and amazing women that you are. Thank you so much, and goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, Lillian. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Goodbye, everybody.